In my last video, I showed my admiration for Apple cases and slim and thin cases for my iPhone 12 Pro Max. I also said that the Apple clear case with MagSafe was the best clear case I've ever used on a phone, period. So today we're going to see if that still is true. Here is the Gear4 Crystal Palace Snap case, and I've been using it for the last couple of weeks. We're going to see how this stacks up against the Apple clear case. Let's get into it. We'll start with the Apple clear case with MagSafe. Now, if you watched my previous video, my thoughts on this case have remained unchanged. The only difference is I corrected a math mistake that I made on the table of the specs. So if you haven't seen it, go watch it. This case retails for $49. So to me, I think that is on the expensive end of cases for an iPhone. The packaging is plain, there's no big claims made, nothing about drop protection or warranty, and we do have the diagram that shows us how to put the case on in case you don't know how to do so yourself. It's pretty easy to get on, and when you finally put it on, there's a neat little MagSafe animation that shows the color of the case, and since it's clear, it just shows my background. But the case is not as easy to get off. It's not the most difficult in the world, but it also probably could be a little bit easier. It looks good when you're looking at the phone. The trim around the case is good, except there's one little thing I do not like, but we'll get to that in a minute. It also looks pretty good on the back. I love how minimal it looks, but I would have to say it took me a little while to get used to the magnets on the back instead of it being a fully clear case. But now that I've used to it, I do like how Apple has done it the best. It's the most minimal way I've seen of a clear case having the MagSafe compatibility. It's very slim. It is sleek and it feels great in the hand. I love how it looks, and it's a very low profile case, which I'm a big fan of. Here's the little part I don't like. It is the bottom being cut out of the case. I don't understand why they do this. I guess you could say it's so you could swipe up a little easier, but then again, if you look at the previous cases Apple made for the older iPhones that had a home button, you still had the bottom cut out and you don't have to swipe up from the bottom. So I don't think that's the case. I'm not sure why they do it. I would much rather have protection on the bottom, plus it would look a little better when you're looking at the screen to see the trim go fully around. It would just look a little more flush. I wish they would finish out the bottom on the clear one like they did with the silicone and the leather. Those look great. This case slightly hinders one-handed use, but it is very minimal. I can reach to the far left app on my screen, which is Apollo, pretty easily without having to take my pinky off the bottom of the phone, which is important to me. I hate when I have to shift my hand around to move my thumb to hit certain apps. Now the Pro Max is not very great for one-handed use regardless, but I don't want the case to make it any worse, and this case doesn't really have that effect. It is a little slippery, but it is not the worst I've ever used by any means. It doesn't slide around too much, I think. But when I first got the case, it was very slippery, where it was almost concerning, and I didn't want to use it because I thought it was going to fly out of my hand. But after a few days, it started getting a little grippier, and I think it was just because like my oils settled in with the case. I'm not sure, but it works a lot better now, and I don't have that problem anymore. The buttons aren't bad, but they're definitely not great. They're kind of mushy, but they're not the mushiest I've ever used, and they're not nearly as mushy as people made them seem to be in the reviews I was reading about the case. They made it seem like the case was like unusable. It was so mushy, but that is clearly not the case. But they do not have the clicky and tactile feel that the silicone and leather cases have, which I absolutely adore. I mean, you can still hear them, but they take definitely more effort. Like you'll push it before you see and feel the clickiness. It's raised above the screen, so if you lay the phone face down, your screen isn't touching the surface, and it is also raised above the camera bump, so if you lay it on its back, your camera lenses aren't rubbing the surface either. But since it's raised just like the camera bump is, if you press the top left corner of the phone, it does still have a wobble. I mentioned that in my last video, I messed up the specs a little bit. I said that the phone was completely naked in the weight, which is not true. There is a screen protector on my phone, so that has now been updated to reflect that in the table of specs, which are right here. With the Apple Clear case on, the phone now weighs 272 grams, which adds 33 grams to its weight. It is now 10.8 millimeters thick, so it adds 3.4 millimeters to its depth, and it is now 81.7 millimeters wide, and it adds 3.6 millimeters to its width. This case is about as slim as they can get without offering any protection at all. It still has some drop protection. They don't even rate it. I would not test it. I haven't really tested it because I can't afford to do so, but it does offer some protection rather than just having a naked phone or a skin. It is a little more protective than a skin would be. It hasn't really scratched at all that I can notice. Normally a lot of clear cases get a ton of scratches and you can see it looks real ugly, and they sometimes occur within about a week of use. And I've used this thing for weeks and it looks great. It's also not yellowing that I can tell, which is super important to me because a lot of clear cases start yellowing and they look terrible and your phone looks dingy. And it's just a waste of money and I hate it. So these are much better. I have not noticed really any problems with scratching or yellowing. For what this case offers, it is excellent and I love it. It is one of my favorites, but there are some drawbacks and I do think it is a little overpriced. I think $49 is too much for a clear case that offers not very much protection and kind of just keeps your phone from getting scratched. Next is Gear4's Crystal Palace Snap. This case retails for $50, so it is technically a little more expensive than the other case, but I think there's a lot more justification for the price of this case versus the Apple case. The packaging has a lot going on. It says it's compatible with MagSafe, not that MagSafe is built into it, so there must be some sort of difference there. It does say there is a 13-foot drop protection, which I cannot afford to test, but maybe in the future when the channel gets bigger, I can start testing drop protection, but we'll take it for its word. It also says it's 5G compatible. Thank God. And it does have D30 Crystal X technology, which I will touch on a little bit later, but that actually is kind of cool. The case is easy to put on, but it isn't as easy as the Apple Clear case to put on, and there is no MagSafe animation. So I think this is probably where the MagSafe compatible term comes into play, but it is pretty easy to take off. It's actually a little easier to take off than the Apple Clear case is. When you're looking at the screen, the case's trim around the phone doesn't look bad, but I don't like how the bottom looks. It is a little distorted. I wish it would be a little more stable and stay straight across, but that is getting a little nitpicky. The back does not look very good. I think there's too much going on. There's the Gear4 branding at the top, which is too much. There's protected by D30 at the bottom, which I don't care to know every time I look at it. And the magnet looks a little worse. You can tell that it is not as thin and it is not as minimal as the Apple cases is, but it's not horrible, I guess, but it definitely does not look good in my opinion. The buttons are starting to look a little discolored after closer look, but it's nothing bad. And I have used this for a long time, for several weeks. So I think it could definitely be in worse shape, but they are starting to discolor a tiny bit. I like that the bottom of the phone is protected with this case, but I don't like Gear4's take on it. They did not align the cutouts at the bottom with the speaker holes on the bottom of the phone. That just looks bad. I don't know why they didn't do that. I feel like it's just lazy. They made the same symmetrical cuts and they just didn't care. And it's also a little flimsy, so maybe that's why Apple dodged making the bottom of the case for so many years on their phones. No, their new cases have them and they're great, so they could totally do it. Come on, Apple, get it done. This case makes one-handed use a bit more of a struggle, but I can still reach the Apollo app. It just requires a little bit more effort, but my pinky can still stay underneath the phone, which I like. I hate when I have to readjust my hand. It is bulkier than the Apple case. You can clearly tell when you're trying to use one hand. This case is a little slippery, but I don't think it's any more slippery than the Apple case, and I don't think that case is slipperier than this case. It has a fair amount of grip and it doesn't really go flying out of your hand like some clear cases tend to do. The buttons have some mush, but not as much as the Apple Clear case. When I first got this case, I did have to break the buttons in. It took a little bit for them to become easier to press, and now they're pretty usable, but I didn't use the volume buttons enough apparently because they are a little bit harder to press than I prefer. Like the Apple Clear case and almost every other case, it is raised above the screen, so if you lay it flat on its face, the screen of your phone does not touch the surface. It is also raised above the camera bump, so if you lay it backwards, your camera lenses aren't laying on the surface either. And it still does have a little bit of a wobble if you press the leftmost top corner. Now the specs of this case reinforce my findings of using this case the last several weeks. At 283 grams, it is 11 grams heavier than the Apple Clear case, which you can definitely notice. It's only 0.1 millimeter thicker, so you don't really notice that much at all, I don't think. But it is 2.7 millimeters wider, and that is definitely noticeable. You saw it with my one-handed test. it does make the phone a little bit more unwieldy than I would like. For as long as I've used this case, I am very pleased with its scratch resistance and its anti-yellowing technology built in, because it's not yellow pretty much whatsoever, except for the buttons have a little bit of discoloration, which makes me think it might actually spread to the rest of the case sooner than later, but we'll see. I do have to think that this new improvements versus the other Gear 4 cases I've used, the other clear ones used to get scratched pretty easily, but they had a black trim around the edges or a colored trim, so you couldn't really see if it was discolored, so maybe that was why they did that on those. But I have to think it's that D30 technology they put in here, because this is pretty amazing. It didn't scratch at all. I was expecting scratches out of the box within like a week, and so far it looks really good. I don't notice hardly any. There's like little finite hair-like ones, but if you can't tell from the naked eye, then that is cool with me. It does offer great protection. I haven't tested its drop ability like I've mentioned, but it does do a good job of protecting the phone from scratches, and I do feel comfortable if I dropped it in this case versus the Apple case. If I drop it in that one, I expect it to crack or something to go wrong. This one seems to be like it can take a bit more of a beating, but it is no OtterBox defender by any means. At $50, I think it's about $10 overpriced, similar to the Apple case, but at least this one seems to be a bit more justifiable. It does protect it more, so it feels like you're getting more value out of this one, but I don't like how it looks. I think not having the MagSafe patent or whatever's going on there, why it says it's MagSafe compatible, definitely makes it look uglier. I'm just not a fan of, it's non-minimalist compared to the Apple case, and there's too much writing going on, less writing. I don't want all that on there. But it's not a bad deal. There's a lot worse cases you can buy for $50. Both cases are good options. Neither one is a bad buy in my opinion. But if you are going for more thin and sleek, Apple's definitely the way to go. I think they just nailed the look of this as well. It looks really sleek and it just looks really clean on the phone versus this one. It just has too much going on. I don't like all the writing, the thicker magnets. Definitely takes away from it. But if I want more protection, I would definitely go with the Gear 4 case. It seems to be a bit better about that, and it is starting to yellow, I think, a tiny bit on like the buttons, which is concerning. It makes me think it's going to happen to the whole thing, but so far the Apple case seems to be doing well in that field, which is really unusual. Usually clear cases start turning yellow or scratch, and this seems to not do that. Maybe that's why they are charging a bit more for them this year. Apple, I think, takes the cake in this comparison. I would use it even though the buttons are a little worse, but I prefer slim and sleek. That is kind of like my top priority. So this is the winner. I would take this over the Gear 4, but really it's not a bad case either. I just wish they both were a little bit cheaper, especially the Apple case. Thanks for watching. If you liked any part of this video, please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you want to see any more iPhone case reviews or any of my other content in the future. And leave a comment on anything you'd like me to add to these videos or other cases you'd like me to review. Until next time.